one or two interesting ideas that came up in the discussion. Just something that
I think the interesting place for all of us is what's happening in higher ed, which is sort of unusual because if we go back probably 5 to 7 years ago, higher ed was probably lagging behind. Now, we're very fortunate, actually. One of the latest speakers today, George Siemens, is certainly one of the leaders in this field, and I really respect a lot of what George has to say in the field. But he's someone, together with Stephen Downes, who developed the whole concept of MOOCs. And what's been interesting is watching how traditional institutions have appropriated MOOCs, and in some cases, I think, have been a little bit unreasonable in the way they've done that. They've sort of sometimes... we may get that through me, sorry. I'll go again. Just wait for him to come.
No, it's just had to...
That's okay, yeah. Okay, so, I mean, what we're seeing in higher ed is through MOOCs is some discovery and exploration, really. There are some ideas here that people are taking on board, and some of them are really trying to fit it into the traditional education structure, whereas others are, being true to the original model and looking for a more distributed operating environment which allows large numbers of students to get a high-quality education, which is what we want to see.
We're seeing MOOCs moving more into vocational education these days. Do you see it also moving in more towards secondary education? Or is that a step too far?
It's a really good question. Again, K-12 has been cautious in that area. I mean, you go to something like, there's been a lot of small models around. Probably, Florida Virtual High School would be the largest probably of its type in the K-12 space. Some of it's got to do with what their intent is, what's their goal. Is it financial? Is it trying to expand in student enrolments? Are they filling a gap? Subject gap, an area of expertise they can't cover. And so it's sort of, I think that's what's got in the way. The other interesting piece is that some of the barriers have nothing to do with technology. They're all to do with logistics and time zones. And so it's interesting that the barriers they come up against are things like, well, how can we make sure that all our students are available at a certain time? Now, I would say all that's doing is highlighting the problems we have for every student, that we are true lockstep in the way we look at learning and how it happens. But I'd like to think that the true notions that both George and Stephen were talking about, where you've got this distributed learning model with nodes and people looking for expertise in learning networks, I think there's huge capacity for that.
And the other thing that you mentioned, George's work, George has also been looking quite a lot at learning analytics recently, and I think the issue of big data also came up in your panel. Now, there seems to be, a lot of people talking about the promise of data. I haven't seen that actually materialize, and especially if we think of, K-12 and classroom-based, physical settings. Maybe you can say something about the problems there and the challenges there, and maybe some ideas of how we could move forward.
Yeah, I think the use of analytics and learning analytics is again a very interesting one, because as you highlighted, conceptually it has a lot of appeal. People all of a sudden say, "Wow, I'll be able to trace or track or monitor where and how our students are learning." And it'll give me another arm to my evaluative processes. But at the same time, unfortunately, I think probably we can call them the more enthusiastic venture capitalists in America have probably set a bad precedent. So companies like In Bloom and Amplify and others, I think, have caused a little bit of caution. They certainly, I think, people were astounded at just how far they were going, and there's this concern in regards to search engines and Google, certainly over here in Europe. It's a balancing act. I think that I'm not so much worried, to be really honest. I think if someone wants to track the fact that I failed French in year 11 when I was at Mildura High School, I really don't care. And if they want to sell that to someone and get money for it, I still don't care. What I care about is the pedagogical stuff underneath it all. Why are they doing it? What are they doing with it? Is it really informing better pedagogy, better experiences for learning? And by and large, when I've looked at particularly those companies and others, it's very crude pedagogy.
Yeah, so you were talking about more advanced participatory pedagogy, inquiry-based learning, project-based learning, and you mentioned the evidence that those seem to be very effective, especially in STEM subjects.
Yep.
And it seems they're probably quite a challenge for doing analytics on those frameworks, right?
That's a good question. Another good question. I agree with you. I was intrigued. A quick example: Philadelphia Science Leadership Academy, an exceptional school run by principals Chris Lehman, and I was in his school in January. Some science kids over there. I said they're having amazing engagement. There were about 8 or 10 of them, about 16, 17-year-olds. And I said, what are they doing? And he said they're looking for a way to make graphene. And I went, what? Graphene. Now I actually know what graphene is by coincidence. It's a long story, but it's a derivative of graphite that potentially is going to have 4 to 5 times the storage capacity of lithium ion, and it's going to have. I said, how can your kids be doing that? Anyway, it went on, and then I went to the bad question. I sort of said, well, that's all very cute, but how do you assess it? And he said, well, it's interesting. He said, so we don't assess it on mistakes because kids can't do stuff like this. They're scientists. I mean, they're actually discovering things. He said, so we track what the mistakes they make, but what we do mark them on is they make the same mistake twice. He said the project they did last year, they made 5 mistakes twice out of about 75. So, I mean, it's a snapshot of what it could be. I like the idea there, and that doesn't have anything to do with learning analytics. That has to do with a very deep learning commitment that I think is another perspective around assessment.
Well, but it's interesting you say when you look at some more radical pedagogies, you need to really shift your perspective on assessment. And if we see learning analytics as an extension of that, and again, we sort of know how to do the analytics. It's the learning part that we need to get straight.
And I'd like to just quickly. I mean, I would say that I rely on people like George, whose wisdom I respect. I think there are a lot of people on the commercial side that just don't get it. So I'm going to be interested to see where they go. That's not going to work. It doesn't matter. Mark's got a big voice. Hey.
Well, sorry. Hopefully, they'll move to the other end of the room.
You're right. No worries.
The other thing you mentioned, the tech gridlock. In your talk, can you expand a bit on that concept?
Well, I mean, I think for a long time we didn't have it. We had sparse technology, and that was my big frustration. I spent 20 years running around the world trying to inspire people to give kids access, and even today, occasionally I strike it, but pretty much everyone accepts that every child's going to have their own personal, portable, fully functional computer. We've got them, so what? We're sort of sitting there looking at them almost. Now, we're not looking at them, but I must admit, I think I go to too many places, where I do see, pedagogical inertia. There's this sort of massive, all these technology, and everyone doesn't quite know where to start. It's almost like it's blocking their thinking. And so I just think we've got to probably... it's got to do a lot with our continued focus on the technology. Pedagogy isn't a topic that people are really good at talking about. And this is an injection of ideas about doing things very differently that at one level is quite complex, but at another level is an everyday part of what we do in schools. So we have to become better at it, and we have to incentivise and inspire teachers to develop these new ideas around these pedagogies.
And where should the source of change be? Should it be sort of coming from ministries, from research, or from the teachers themselves? How do you envision, the way forward?
I think the answer where it comes from is many faceted. It isn't just from one or the other. Certainly, it's a case of coming from. For the most, there's a lot of grassroots innovation. Okay, that's what I was saying. I mean, I've helped build enormous numbers, thousands of teachers. That doesn't change systems. It doesn't change schools, and it often doesn't build sustainable change. Change of hero leader, for instance, a principal in a school often reverts back to normal. So, I think it takes a holistic view. I think it has to be built around some pretty serious change strategies, as I said, and I do think it can often come from courageous, creative policy. I threw the Estonian example in about mathematics, and I know it's a one-off, and I'm not going to say that everything's perfect, They wouldn't say it is either, nor would Conrad Wolfram. But I mean, there was an initiative that came top down, as top down as you could get. On the other side, I could talk about my own country, and I won't go through it all, but I mean, a number of initiatives they've done there from the top down have been appalling. You know, they've just been negative. So I think sometimes we'd like to see more top down because we think we'd see greater change quicker. But the sustainable change, I think, happens more it doesn't happen with a teacher or a minister, it happens somewhere in between. That middle range, which is where, modernlearners.com, that's where our work's focused, because that's why we're doing that work. We believe they're the people who are going to be the change agents to build sustainable change in the future.